women
If
would
you
be
want
better if
women to
men would
set the
just have better
rules, then we
food.
can have that gynocentric world. That's fine. But if you guys want to do this whole we're alpha, we run the world, we need to get out of this gynocentrism, then maybe you do need to take that mind if I am my sister's keeper. Step up, take that responsibility, because there's a whole lot of talking about how we want men to run the world, and then a whole lot of complaining about, oh man, well then we have to do all the work. Well, yeah. Okay.
Rollo Tomas.
All right, perfect.
How's that? Better?
While I'm setting this up, I gotta ask, why Rollo Tomasi from LA Confidential?
Everybody always asks me that. I picked that name a very long time ago, when I was a moderator on a forum called So Suave, and it was just I thought it was just something clever at the time, and you kind of I had to be anonymous in doing what I do and writing what I write and everything else right up until about like 2017. And so I always thought Rollo Tomasi was kind of clever because he's the guy that gets away with it, right? And
I
LA
was gonna say,
Confidential.
like, why the guy who like murdered people?
Yeah. No, because
it's not
like,
a good start.
At the time it was you always used a pseudonym because to go against sort of like the mainstream narrative that was going on at that time was people talk about cancel culture right now, but they don't really realize that cancel culture started about like 16 to 18 years ago. And that's why a lot of us were using, pseudonyms and stuff like that. I felt it was better than like Morpheus or something, from the Matrix or something.
Fair enough.
So
shall we
go ahead.
Sorry. No. Shall we start? Did you want to do a bit of an introduction for people?
I have no video of you, but if that's the way you want to work it, that's fine.
I would love to put video, but I genuinely cannot figure it out on my end. Like, I think it's because I'm running my webcam in OBS right now.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever. However you want. Okay.
So, yeah, I apologize. If you need to know, I am blonde. I've got medium hair and pink headphones.
I know exactly. I know who you are. I know exactly what you look like.
I
think what's funny is a lot of people think like, whenever I talk to people who are sort of, do people think you're mainstream? I mean, because I don't really see you as being like super mainstream. Like it's not like I'm going with Candace Owens or something like that. It's not like it's somebody who's got like a daytime talk show kind of thing, or Tim Pool. Tim Pool I would consider like is sort of like, I guess, mainstream, but mainstream as far as like the internet is concerned is like not necessarily mainstream when it comes to like cable channels or streaming service channels and things like Daily Wire. I would say is definitely mainstream, but I think that whenever I go on, especially if I go on with a woman, anybody who like I have sort of differences with, it always comes down to sort of this like team sport effort, right? And I'm sure you've probably already seen this because everybody's like, "Oh man, Rollo Tomasi, he's gonna destroy Lauren."
God,
it's like no,
take it out and hatchet it. I've gotten some interesting comments. Exactly. Team Rollo's in the chat. Gonna get them wristbands like Team Edward and Team Jake and everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the thing is I think that a lot of people online right now, I just want to sort of preface our conversation here first. Whenever I do like called takedown videos, whenever I do like detailed like reaction videos or breakdown videos, I think is probably a better term for them. I always start with this caveat, and my caveat is this: is like I don't know 90% of the people that I'm doing like detailed, breakdown videos of. And so I try to start from the point where it's like, I'm talking about the arguments here. I'm talking about points, like point by point, as opposed to like trying to tear that other person down, because I don't know them and they don't know me. And so I'm really trying to be as objective as I can in understanding what it is that people are saying, and then like sort of picking apart and dissecting that argument as best that I can. So it's never really like I try not to anyways, make it a personal attack, but that doesn't mean that everybody in the chat isn't like, "Oh man, she looks like a 12-year-old boy," or they'll find some really sort of juvenile way to turn it into a team sport. But I don't think we really test ideas that way. And so I just want to let you know, like before we jump in here, it's like my point is not like to destroy Lauren Southern, but it's just to sort of clear the air and I think define some terms right now, because a lot of the stuff that I get into and a lot of the things that I see sort of in the quote unquote manosphere right now are very distorted from the way that I think the red pill really sort of came up over the last 20 years. And I just wanted to take a moment to I don't know, I guess define terms.
Well,
Maybe that's
I'm glad, because that's literally what I wanted to do with the first half
yeah.
of this conversation, and I respect that approach absolutely, and I understand people's audiences don't. Some of the comments, everyone gets crazy comments. It literally doesn't matter if you make bread on your YouTube video, you're gonna have a crazy person in there that's like, we need to assassinate gluten-free people or something.
Right, or
But
else it'll be I'll tell you, like I love how literal Twitter and the social media sphere, it could be just anything really. I mean, it could be IG for that matter too, but there's always one person who's super analytical, or if not many more than that, but they're very super analytical and super literal. And it's like, well, you shouldn't really use metaphor and allegories and things like that. And it's like, oh God, I don't have time to explain this to you. Like either you get it or you don't.
okay, so let's start with that. Let's start with, I'm sorry, you're gonna hear my son. Those are excited screams in the
You
background.
I have two greyhounds here, so you might hear them in the background.
Oh, too. Wonderful. Love a man with dogs. That's good. Dog man. Good start here. But let's, the manosphere. Could you define what your definition is? Because I do feel like that is going to be a very important thing to define here, because we probably have competing definitions.
Yeah, we probably do, because a lot of what the manosphere has become has been, for lack of a better term, ghettoized. And I mean it in the sense that, like, back in the day, like when we were referring to like what ghettos were, and I'm not talking about like in the sense that we sort of like think of like an Urban Dictionary right now. I mean like ghettos for like the Irish people or the Black people or the Puerto Rican people or what, like in different sort of factionalizations. And that's really what I see happening to the manosphere, because the manosphere used to be just guys getting together and comparing notes. So you have to know what the history of the manosphere was before you can really realize just how like compartmentalized it's become, and how I don't want to really say it's balkanized, because it's not really balkanized, but it's like been separated into sort of like different tribes. And again, what I was saying in the beginning of this is that there's a lot of team sports or team mentality that goes along with now what has become the manosphere. So to sort of backtrack a few things here, you have to. I've been doing and writing what I've been writing for almost 20 years now. In 2022, it'll be 20 years. I started back in 2002, really, on a users forum, I guess would probably be the best way to put it, because there was no Reddit back then. There was no Discord. It was just like user forums, like BBE forums. Like I think that's what they were called back then. But it was there was part of the seduction community back then. And so like the old school pickup artists had like alt fast seduction, and I was part of a group called SOSWAF, which is still around right now. After almost 20 years, is still up, and it's still a functioning forum where people go and sort of, it's like a marketplace of ideas. And so from about 2001, 2002, I started participating in a lot of these conversations. And so when people tell me, they start using, they throw around the term the red pill. That means a lot of different things to a lot of different people right now. So back when I was part of SOSWAV, and I was a moderator on that forum right up until about like 2013 or 2014, and it was I guess a marketplace of ideas for guys who came together and said, hey, these are the best practices, or this is what I see going on with the women in my area. And this is the dating situation here. This is the sexual marketplace for where I happen to be. And that was all over the world. And you have to remember, this is like the first time when guys were getting together and really kind of collectively sharing notes. So you could be in Hollywood, you could be in Vegas, you could be in New York, you could be in the UK, you could be in, India, you could be in Japan. And guys would get together and they were essentially just, aggregating all of this understanding about like their own behavior, men's behavior, women's behavior, what they saw was going on. And eventually we kind of coalesced everything into what we used to call, guys who are sort of plugged in the matrix, who didn't really understand men's nature or women's nature or how to, get girls kind of thing. And it was really all part of the pickup artists community back then. And I think what's funny now is we still kind of harken back to the PUAs now, and we sort of use them as our boogeymen. We look at them and we say, we use them as like sort of these ridiculous figures that we can, we can all agree that nobody wants to be a PUA, right? Well, that hasn't really been a relevant term for, I would argue, like about 12 or 15 years right now. So what was a PUA back in 2002 is not even close to like what our concept of, game or any of that kind of stuff is right now. And the reason I'm going all the way back to this is because that's where the Manosphere really started, because it started as guys collecting, data and going out into the field, experimenting, coming back and saying, okay, this worked, this didn't work, applying psychology, applying sociology, in some cases applying anthropology. I mean, there's so many like sub-disciplines and sub-fields that came into, I guess I don't say, they were important to the collection of understanding of what was going on back then. And then as we moved into, say, 2009, 2013, 2015, it sort of morphed into what we now know as the Manosphere. And it was guys getting together, just basically trying to understand intersexual dynamics. So we had gone from how do you get in a girl's pants, right? How do you play the game? How do you how do you get the girls kind of thing, to how do I understand men's nature and women's nature? And it sort of snowballed into something that was a whole lot bigger than what it originally started to be. So when I talk to guys who are quote unquote, MRAs or MGTOWs or black pill guys or white pill guys or tradcon guys who are just, kind of wrapped up in the red pill, and I think we don't really, we do ourselves a disservice if we don't go all the way back and understand like where it all began before we start, throwing rocks at PUAs or game or whatever the Manosphere is sort of morphing into. And the problem now, I think, is that we've gone from being in this forum where it was this collection and marketplace of ideas, and you kind of had to think about what you were going to type to do a forum post. And you had you had probably about another, 50 or 100 people in a forum topic and having a conversation about a particular topic before you would move over to another topic. And we don't have that anymore. So we moved from like this forum, understanding to me writing a blog. I started the Rational Mail back in 2011 because I had all these people saying, hey, you gotta get a blog out. You gotta collect all of this stuff and put it together. And so I started reading a blog called it was Chateau Heartiste, but then before that it was like Royce in DC, and it was by a guy named Royce who was sort of a gamer guy, but then that turned into sort of he really went really political and really like sort of ethno-national after a while, and it just changed the flavor of his blog. But he was actually one of the number one blogs in what we now know as the Manosphere. And then Roosh, of course, was a big deal right up until he decided to become sort of this Eastern Orthodox, mountain guru, and wherever he's doing his thing right now. But it used to be myself, Rollo Tomasi, Royce, and Roosh, and we were the three R's of the Manosphere for a while. And that was, if there was a golden age of the Manosphere, I think maybe that was it, because we were really kind of coming together, and we were doing bigger work, I think, than just PUA or just learning game. It was more about like evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology. People always ask, what is the red pill? And I always tell them there's no real elevator pitch for the red pill, because there's so many sub-disciplines and so many subfields that go into understanding intersexual dynamics that it's really hard to say. I mean, you could say it's all about game. It's all about, understanding why men are the way they are and women are the way they are. That's definitely part of it, but it's, evolutionary psychology, social psychology, evolutionary biology. I mean, I have done things as diverse as like try to figure out like endocrinology, right? Dopamine and that kind of stuff, and sort of pick apart why it is that we think in certain ways with respect to, men being men and women being women, that's, gender differences, sexual differences. And like when you look at how there are, I'm sure you're probably familiar with the James Damore case,
Yeah.
where just saying that there are differences, biological, concrete, binary differences between men and women, that's enough to get you fired from Google, right? That's enough to get you canceled these days. And you want to know why I still use a pseudonym? That's half the reason right there. So,
Right.
there's a
Okay,
lot
so
of there's a lot to it, but what was the Manosphere is not what the Manosphere is today. So today, I really think what's happened is, excuse me, we've gone from the forum format to a blog format, and then we went to sort of social media format where everybody's like on Twitter, everybody's on Instagram, everybody's on Discord right now, and then we went to video format, which is doing live streams and things. It's much more much easier to do now than it was back then, and as we move into more convenient forms of media, I think we have lost a lot of what the Manosphere was along the way. So we make these presumptions about things like I talk about hypergamy quite a bit. People don't really understand where that term was developed and how it came to mean what it means in the Manosphere, and the sort of 20-year history of developing it into what we now kind of take for granted. Or if I talk about alpha widows, or if I talk about war brides dynamics, or I talk about like the soulmate myth, those kinds of things, we sort of one-itis, right? We sort of just take those things for granted. But then what happens is we incorporate those into whatever our particular faction happens to be. So when I talk about the red pill, I'm talking about just sort of like the loose science of the red pill. I try to make it as objective as possible. I've always said this, is that the red pill is a praxeology. It is not a ideology, and everybody wants to make it into an ideology because that's the
I'm
easier
sorry,
way.
man. My chat or they keep saying you're an encyclopedia right now, and I was just
Yeah, well, and I have been doing this, like I said, for about 20 years now. I've got four different books, and it's like people need to understand this stuff, because where we're at right now is we get guys who take this information and they use it in such a way, or they develop like belief sets that can be very, very damaging for them. So as we're saying, like in your tweet earlier this week, when you've got guys sending you death threats, when you've got guys who are like saying, you've got black pill doomers like that kid in Plymouth in the UK last weekend. Yeah, those guys, people will say, oh, that's the Manosphere. No, that's the black pill. And that's how that guy took that information and sort of had his nihilistic, despondent life. It turned into what turned into what his behaviors ended up being. But that's not the Manosphere, and that's not the red pill. That's just how he interpreted it. And that's how he developed a belief set around that, as twisted and, self-destructive as it was.
Okay, so I completely understand that it is a complex group with many dynamics, and I'm sure there are factions within the Manosphere that hate each other, right? That
Well, absolutely, yeah,
wouldn't even get along in the least.
Well, what happens is this: is the red pill itself, I believe, is sort of a loose science. It is a praxeology. It is sort of like my friend Ryan Stone has described it as the Chilton Manual for intersexual dynamics. It's like, how do you take the car apart and put the car back together? It's not an ideology. It's not a list of prescriptions. It's not 12 rules for the Manosphere or 12 rules for the red pill. It's not a prescription. It is a description. What happens then is you get like MRAs, MGTOWs, black pill. You get the tradcons. You get, white pill, whatever pill, that whatever the hotness is. Those are prescriptions. Those are, here's the best practices. Here's what we believe, and here's how we can force fit this red pill understanding into what our pre-existing belief set is. And that might be the black pill, right? It might be doomers. It might be MRAs. It might be MGTOW. It might be guys who are, it might be game. It might be guys who still want to go out and just simply get laid, right? The red pill is the information. It is the theory. Whereas like these factions tend to be the practice of that theory. And that's where the discrepancy happens. That's where a lot of crap happens. And that's how you get death threats, right? That's how I get death threats.
For sure.
Yeah.
May I ask a question? Am I permitted?
Yes.
So you mentioned at the beginning that the overall theme of the Manosphere is getting together and comparing notes. And I find that like a very interesting point, because when I was thinking about how the Manosphere got to the point that it is at today, I was wondering, what is the culture of it? What is the community there? Because the Manosphere, in theory, I don't think is a bad idea. There are going to be men that are going to have trouble speaking to women. There are going to be men that are not going to understand sexual dynamics at all. And how do we improve those men? Well, we have to give them a space with other men with experience that can help them, give them advice. Of course, we need that. However, I think there is a large aspect of the community that hasn't quite realized, when they are comparing notes, the type of man who needs the Manosphere are two types of men. One, men who can't get laid, have trouble talking to women, and don't quite understand women, and therefore are probably having negative interactions with women. And two, men who have had failed relationships with women, horrific divorces, probably abusive mothers. I mean, there are stories about young boys who are abused by single mothers, horrific stuff, right? And so the type of men that are going to need the Manosphere are not going to be Chad, who has no problem speaking to women, that got married and had a kid and is at a barbecue. He doesn't need a 4-hour live stream on how to understand women's psychology. So all of the notes that are going to be put into this comparing notes are all going to be really fucking awful stories about women. They're all going to be nightmarish. And then if you're going here to compare notes to see if other men have similar experiences, you're going to be like, holy shit, all women are literally psychopathic, evil women, because the men you're engaging with are not going to be men that are having healthy experiences with women.
Right. So here's what I always get, like, a lot, and I'm actually surprised a lot of, like, I haven't got this question already, but a lot of times when I go on someone's podcast and they understand just sort of like the basics of what I talk about, or what I, maybe they read my first book or whatever, the first thing I want to ask is like, who hurt you? Like, what turns you evil, right? What turns you, you don't think right. I want to get to know you and figure out what went wrong, right? And it's like, there's not anything that went wrong. That's just it. I've been married for 25 years, happily. I just celebrated my 25th anniversary last month. So I get it from both sides. Like, if I go and like, for instance, if I say, hey, I have what most guys would consider a pretty ideal marriage, right? I still have sex with my wife. I've raised a daughter from, infancy to 23 years old. I have a pretty decent life, but the thing is that I can either get run up the flagpole for that, or I get disqualified for that. So what I mean is that, like, if I go and I say, hey, I've been married for 25 years, people go, well, don't listen to anything he has to say. He can't possibly be red pill. He's been married for 25 years, right? And then from the tradcon side of things, it's like, he can't possibly be married for 25 years. He's red pill. And so either way, I don't get to win when it comes to sort of my background. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that I think that we focus a little bit too much on the personal stories or the anecdotes or whatever it is that sort of brought these guys to the Manosphere in the first place. So are there a lot of really messed up guys in the Manosphere? Absolutely there are. But there's also a lot of guys who came together to compare notes, whose lives have been changed and have been saved as a result of that. And I've got a 20-year history with these guys who have, literally come out to conventions and talks that I've given just so that they could tell me that, they had a plan to kill themselves. They'd actually set a date to kill themselves, and then canceled that date because they read my first book and they go, it all became very clear. Now I understand what's going on. And now I realize that I have accurate information, and I can sort of rebuild my life according to that accurate information right now. So for every guy that's out there that seems like really messed up and really like hates women, and I understand why that is, because a lot of guys right now see the Manosphere or see the red pill as sort of their validation for why their lives are so fucked up. And they go, oh, well, of course, I get misquoted on this all the time. They'll say, Rollo says that women can't actually love men. And I'm like, no, that's not what I said. And if you would read my book, and if you would actually read that entire passage that's in that book, you would understand that I'm saying that women cannot love you in the way that you think that they should be able to love you, right? And that comes down to what I think is one of the fundamental maxims of the red pill, which is this, is that the red pill does not exist so that men will hate women. It exists so that men will not hate women for what they can't be to them. And that's really hard for guys today, because this generation of young men, like between the ages of say like 18 and 29 who aren't getting laid whatsoever. I mean, from the GSS studies, we can see that statistically that's what's happening right now. We've never been more isolated. We like to think that the internet is this huge extroversion when in fact it's really this huge introversion. And the more that we're isolated, the more we start looking for our ghettos, right? The more we start looking for like-minded echo chambers where we can listen to other guys who are just as fucked up as we are, and then sort of commiserate constantly. That's how you get things like the black pill or the doom pill or whatever the most despondent nihilistic side of this whole thing is. But that's not the only part of the manosphere right now.
Yeah.
So the part that we focus on are those guys. And so when we see that happen and we see guys are like, yeah, oh man, women are really fucked up, right? That's when we look at that, that's sensational. But what we don't look at is the success stories where guys go, you know what, I was going to kill myself. And now I decided not to because now I have accurate information and now I know what's going on and now I can build a better life according to what I know because I'm red pill aware right now. I can build myself into the best version of myself. And then you get into sort of like self-improvement and all of this other good stuff too. We don't talk about those things. We only talk about it when you get death threats. We only talk about it when some dumbass goes and, shoots up Plymouth or Alec Manassian runs over people in Canada. That gets press, but what we don't get press for is guys getting together and actually figuring this stuff out. And that's the hardest part because a lot of guys who are sort of like quote unquote blue pill and they become red pill, not every guy can handle that. Not every guy crosses that abyss. They built lives according to what they thought was supposed to be the way things work. Like this is the rules. This is the old set of books. These are the rule sets that everybody's playing by. And then they realize somewhere along the lines that that's not actually what's going on. And they either get despondent or they find some way to deal with that discontent either destructively or constructively. And I would argue that more people deal with it constructively than they do destructively. But we focus on the guys who destroy themselves and destroy their lives and try to drag down as many people as they can with them.
Right, and this is a problem with the media in the sense that they're obsessed with negative press. They're obsessed with things that are going to get views, and a man getting healing from an internet community of men that are giving him good advice is not interesting as... Yeah, it's not as interesting as a guy going and shooting a bunch of people, which of course still needs to be reported on. But sorry, I'm jumping in here. I've let you have your little essay.
Go ahead.
So that's another thing I've been thinking about when I was considering coming into this debate is why because I know as much as the things you've been describing, I know myself. I've been and met members of the Manosphere. I've been a part of it to an extent. In the sense that I've been an ally. But I know there are positive aspects of the Manosphere, so I've been considering, like, how did it get to the point that it is today, where it's kind of getting more toxic and more, and I don't even think you disagree with me that it's toxic, as you were just saying. You say anything, and you have half the community saying, you're married, so you're not really red-pilled or whatever, you're not really a Manosphere supporter, you're married, so then you're not really tradcon. There's so many different factions just at each other's throats, so that's toxic to me already. But then there's an aspect of, I see men that get into the Manosphere, and they may have noble intentions going in to try and fix themselves, but it becomes a bit of a copium or an addiction. And I wonder if that has something to do with there being a financial incentive of Manosphere creators for men not to actually be healed. Because a healed man is someone who would go in for 3 months, learn about sexual dynamics and relationships, get out of the Manosphere and go live his life. Even if you're MGTOW, if you're a guy that wants to do your own thing, that's awesome. Go do your own thing. You don't do your own thing by sitting and consuming videos about women that you're not even talking to, having a weird parasocial rivalry with them all freaking day. That is the opposite of going your own way. That's like leaving a party, slamming the door, realizing no one noticed or cared, then walking back in and continually saying, hello, did anyone notice? And I feel like there may be a bit of a financial incentive there to make sure that men do not leave the Manosphere and do not actually heal, because you want guys watching 4-hour live streams about women. You want them not having successful relationships because that means they're not watching the videos. The guy who is sitting there watching every live stream a Manosphere advice or MGTOW channel makes is a guy that's going to be a primary supporter, subscriber, donor. And if they leave, that's, a mass part of that market.
Right. Well, I have, in fact, I mentioned this on my last live stream, as a matter of fact. Back in 2018, I did a talk, and it was called the State of the Manosphere Address. Right. It was like 2018. And I decided to do a SWOT analysis of it. You know what a SWOT analysis is? Strengths, weaknesses,
Okay,
opportunities, and threats, or something like that. And it's funny because every now and then I go back to that and I watch that video. And I go, God, man, I was very prophetic in that. And even if I, sound like I'm glossing myself, but I think I kind of was. And one of the things that I thought was the biggest threat to the manosphere at that time was a commercialization of it. And that's easy for me to say, right? I sell books, right? So people will go, well, you're just out there to sell as many books as you can. It's like, well, yeah, I'm an author. That's what I'm supposed to do. Okay. But when I was analyzing this, I go, here's what's going on is that we have gotten to the point in social media, period. And I don't care if it's in the manosphere or the financial sphere, the political ideologues, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's the fitness sphere, whether it's real estate, I don't care what the hell it is. Everybody is their own brand right now. And I think that's the biggest problem in the manosphere. And I saw this coming as far back as like 2017, 2018. And I said then, I'll say it right now, is everybody right now is their own brand. So whether you're dating or you're trying to, you've got a side hustle, or maybe you've got your own business, or maybe you just simply want to, rattle on about how screwed up Trump is, or how screwed up Biden is, or how, whatever the world's going to hell, or here's my religion, whatever your particular reason for being online is, that's your brand. Mm-hmm. And for the manosphere, that's what it becomes. And so a lot of guys get into the manosphere because they see it as an easy niche. Because there's a lot of guys who really are either looking for answers like, how do I get laid, or how do I understand women, or how do I even develop these social skills? Because we're looking at a generation of young men right now who simply lack social skills because they've been brought up. First generation has been brought up behind a monitor. Their social skills literally have come from chat windows, or from pictures, or from porn, or from watching the videos on, a riot happen in Portland, right? Whatever it is, they're seeing this happen, rather than learning live in real time, face to face with somebody, where they actually have to understand, vocal intonations and learn subcommunications and things like that. And get to the point where you've got men who are already at a disadvantage because they've been raised as if they've been defective girls, and now they don't have those social skills. That's a really big market for a lot of guys right now. You want to know why they keep going back to those channels where they can all commiserate, because that's where they get off. That's that feels good, to have a group or a tribe of guys who understand you, who are just as, socially inept as you are, to sit there and be able to talk with one another and, bounce ideas back and forth and say, hey man, girls are really fucked up. Yeah. Girls are really fucked up. Yeah. And okay, I'll see you next week. That kind of thing. This is the first time in human history where we've been able to do that on the fly, and do that with like worldwide, globally right now. And so, yeah, there is a definite financial, incentive to do those things, but everybody is their own brand. It's not just, like I said, it's just not just the manosphere. And so what happens is those brands end up becoming sort of like little sub factions of whatever it is that is catering to that particular that belief set for those particular young men. And so, for instance, there's in the manosphere right now is what I call the red meat hustlers. We're really kind of in what I call the hustle economy right now. So everybody's got a Gumroad class. Everybody's got a new Zoom meeting kind of thing. Everybody's got a 97 page e-pamphlet that they're hawking on Gumroad or whatever. But it's also it's, I don't say pandering, but it's also catering to that particular niche of guys. And it's real easy to hook up on the guys who haven't quite crossed the abyss. They don't see how they can go from being sort of this old blue pill way, loser way, to becoming a red pill winner. They would rather stay stuck in never really crossing over into seeing what the opportunities that they could possibly have from within a red pill paradigm. So what happens is these guys will get together and they start sort of creating these little tribes. So
Yeah.
when I talk about like red meat for the red pill, like for right now, for instance, the latest hotness is like, guys like Fresh and Fit or guys like Kevin Samuels right now is holding women accountable. Like, it's almost like this pro revenge fantasy. It's very much like a Maury Povich template show. So the girls call in and say, okay, Kevin, tell me what's wrong with me. And he goes, you're average at best. Ha ha ha. And it's like, that's very satisfying to that particular demographic of guys because they've never been even sidelined or been in the cheering from the stands, watching a woman being held accountable. And so it goes over and over and over again. And guys get, millions of subs. They get a whole lot of money. They get a lot of influx from either donations or they get it from, PayPal or they get it from like doing counseling. And it's this template that keeps going over and over. But the attraction of that template, like I said, is very much like a Maury Povich thing. It's this what I've called pro revenge. I don't know. Are you familiar with the pro revenge subreddit on Reddit?
No, but the whole thing makes sense to me, and I get why people want to do that because obviously in popular culture, we portray the dad as the big bumbling buffoon, right? Men are the thing we step on. We make them silly and funny, and this is, women are the future, and we're getting our revenge right now, and guys are sick of it, and they want to have their own thing. But to me, I don't want to live in a world where the solution to toxic feminism is toxic manosphere. And I even think that you agree that there is a lot of toxicity in the manosphere. You've been talking about it. I'm very, surprised and happy to hear that you're honest about the problems in there. Someone in the chat mentioned hanging around with socially inept people is the worst way to learn how to socialize. So when you get those little groups that don't ever want to move on and grow from what they learn and they just continue to stay comfortable with the socially inept people, I think that gets very dangerous because I think a small amount of content that tells you how to socialize with women and how to understand gender dynamics, then you go out in the world and practice it and see how it works in real life can be really positive. Overdosing on that, I think that has a really negative effect, which brings me, I just want to pivot the topic a little bit because I had another theory as I was thinking about your ideas and manosphere ideas, and I wanted to see if you think this is an accurate assessment. So a lot of guys will say, don't put pussy on a pedestal, right? And I get that. I get that you want to learn to not make women totems. Is that, before I move on, is that an accurate assessment of it?
Close enough. I understand what you're saying.
Okay. So in a lot of ways, it seems like you're trying to teach men to not see women as these totems reflexively so that they're not afraid of them. So almost dehumanize them in some ways reflexively so they're not afraid of them. Like in a lot of manosphere videos I've seen, it's like, if you do this, a woman will respond like this. If you do this, a woman will respond like that. And it's almost like a binary code, or it's like a code that you just insert in, like it's a machine. That's where the term femoid comes from, right? She's an android. You put in. So what I'm seeing happening is in some of these spheres, they'll dehumanize women so that they're not afraid of them because no one is afraid of an object. But what they've actually ended up doing is these men are just as afraid of women, but now they are just afraid of them as objects. And that's where the femoid phenomenon comes in. They're the android, the hateful, malevolent AI walking around. If you do this, all women will respond manipulatively. If you do this, all women will respond by trying to take advantage of you and steal your money. And in my opinion, what people should be focusing on is not teaching men to see women as terrifying objects, but teaching men that women are imperfect people just like them. And this is what I think feminists should do too. Yeah, men are imperfect people just like us. We're complex individuals.
The problem you're going to run into in that situation is that we live in a gynocentric social order right now. So you're not going to tell women what to think about guys at this point. So right now, if you go and I don't care like what you can. There's a lot of people who will say, hey, I'm not a feminist. I especially like if you go and you look at somebody like I'm just going to use Candace Owens for a quick second here. Candace Owens has done several shows where she says, I'm not a feminist, blah, blah, blah. Who could, people don't really identify as feminists. I'm at the point right now where it's like, to identify or to not identify as a feminist right now is completely irrelevant, because what's the first thing that just happened in Afghanistan right now? It's like after this whole debacle went down, the first thing that is the most important thing that anybody wanted to talk about was think of the girls. Well, what about the girls? What about this? It's like, no, we just spent 20 years and trillions of dollars. How many people have died? How much military, material, weapons and hardware did we leave there? I mean, there's so many more important like aspects to that story. But the very first concern we have is, women and little girls over there are going to be sold into slavery or something like that. And I'm not saying that that's not a bad thing. It is, but that's the first concern. And so when you're talking to guys who have this, I don't want to say objective view of women, an object view of women, to say, hey, why don't we all get together and just like sit down at the table and we all agree to come together and stop thinking of each other as objects and start, think of each other as, more human than dehumanizing. That's very hard to do when the primary social order that we're in right now is it expects this old order understanding of these old order responsibilities from men, but with no accountability on the part of women. So guys really have this. I can understand why they get to that point. I understand why they get to the point where they think that pedestalizing women is one thing. But the other thing is are they actually fearful of it, or are they just simply cautious of it? It just kind of depends. It's easy to, again, once I said, it's easy to poke fun at the guys who it seems like they're very insecure, right? It seems like they're making women this sort of monolithic, shibboleth of, terror that they don't want to treat. They want to treat them as like a robot, a social robot, rather than an actual human being. Yeah, I get that. But even the guys who don't do that are still stuck in the same social order that those guys are as well. That's just how those guys are going to react and deal with that. I've said this before, like, I don't know how many times, is that it's not about like it's not a dehumanization thing or an objectifying kind of thing, so much as it is what is a predictive framework. What can you predict? What is the behavior set that is most predictable in that situation? And so a lot of guys will take that and they'll make, like I said, they want this step-by-step solution to their problems. So they want to say, okay, if I do these 12 things, then I'm going to be successful with women, or I'm never going to talk to women ever again, because I'm a MGTOW, because the juice ain't worth the squeeze and I don't want to have to deal with that anymore. And so that's their solution. And guys are simply really looking for some kind of solution. And maybe that's being a simp on OnlyFans, right? Maybe that's being MGTOW. Maybe that's being black pill. Maybe that's learning game and applying it so that they can, maybe they don't want to get into a long-term relationship. But again, I've said this, like, I don't know how many times on my own show, is the idea of men and women being complements to one another. I've always said this. I said men and women are better together than we are apart. The problem we have right now is that women are on one side of the playground and the other guys are on the other side of the playground, and never the two shall meet, because women need a man like a fish needs a bicycle, right? We've been hearing that since the 70s. And for guys on the opposite side, it's the juice ain't worth the squeeze.
Right.
Well, that's not how you form a cohesive society. That's not how you form families. You want to know why the fertility rate is in the toilet right now? That's a big part of it. And a lot of that comes down to, like, who are you going to tell come to the table first? The female side of the playground or the male side of the playground? Because I'll tell you right now, we want to say women should be the ones who get to choose, who get to select, who get to do all these, who get to make the choices, and men are the ones who have to perform and have to display. And so if I'm going to go over to the ladies and say, okay, I know these guys are schmucks, but can you come to the table and like talk to them so we can all be human again? That's really hard to do when those women, for the last 65 years since the sexual revolution, we've been telling them that you go, girl, you can be anything you want to. Don't settle for anything less than the best damn thing in the world. And you don't need a man, but if you want a man, you can have, you're looking for the guy who's 6 foot tall, six pack abs, 6-figure income, whatever that high value guy is, and however unrealistic that happens to be. That's that side. Trying to convince them and say, go against your biological impulses is next to impossible. And going to guys and saying, guys, come to the table. There's some girls there that, you can see them and they're not all wicked, evil bitches. And you can actually have a good long-term relationship. That makes it sound like I'm leading men to the slaughterhouse. because it makes them think that I'm trying to get them to get married, or I'm trying to make them, give
I
them some
I
symbols, or
understand
the matrix.
everything. I understand everything you are saying.
Mhm.
To me, all of the analysis you're making about where men are at, how they are feeling about their position in culture, how they are feeling the need to react to it so that they don't feel victimized again, which all makes sense to me. It all sounds like what feminists tell me. Like
Mhm.
I see so many
Yeah.
parallels between the manosphere and feminism. Like you just said, if I, as a feminist leader, were to tell women that men are okay and they can go hang out with them and just be safe, I feel like I am leading them to the slaughter. They will think I'm leading them to the slaughter because we've told them that even though every man is not a rapist, enough are that you need to assume. Just like I see on a lot of these manosphere channels, not every woman is going to steal all your money. But a lot are, so we have to assume. We have to prepare. We always have to be thinking about worst case situation, which I don't think is a healthy way to live. That doesn't mean don't educate yourself. That doesn't mean don't understand sexual dynamics, statistics, all these kind of things. But to always meet someone of the opposite sex and assume they are going to rape me seems like an insane way to live my life, right? So I would ask you, do you see parallels between the manosphere and feminism? Like, if you were to steel man my argument, could you point out parallels?
I would. So once again, I think we're using the manosphere in like sort of this blanket term right now. I definitely see parallels between the more extreme ends of, like, say, MGTOW, and most definitely within the black pill communities, where it's like
Hmm.
gloom and doom and everything's nihilistic and the juice ain't worth the squeeze. In those communities, absolutely, the parallels to like militant feminism are very, again, very similar. Also, like, I mean, and then on top of that, it's like feminism to me, anyways, um, is not just like purple haired feminine. It's not Lena Dunham, right? It's not like just,
Okay.
the fat
Like
ugly girl with
cartoon,
the,
yeah.
fuchsia hair or whatever like that. That's, I think, what a lot of people want to characterize feminism as. I've said this is I get myself into trouble for saying this sometimes. It's like, I believe that if you have been born within the last, like, say, since 1965, there's some aspect of ideological feminism that has instilled itself in you ideologically somehow. Right? If you believe women should have the right to vote, guess what? You have some sort of feminism has influenced the way that you think. Casual sex, feminism has influenced that in some way. When you talk about women's right to choose, abortion, when it comes to no fault divorce, when it Duluth model of feminism, and the list goes on and on and on. I mean, the very fact that we want to prioritize putting more and more women into the American workplace. When we look at the enrollment stats for college right now, that's a result of an endemic ideological feminism that has been a part of Western culture, really. You can go all the way back to 1848 at Seneca Falls, but certainly since the sexual revolution. So we got to also clarify terms on the feminist side here. So are we talking about like women who are very militantly feminist? Yeah, definitely. So I would say that I do see parallels between the more extreme ends of MGTOW, the more extreme ends of the black pill, and certainly the most extreme sides of what I would refer to as militant feminism. Yes, it's like never the two shall meet. Never trust the other side. And
Hmm.
then I've said this before. It's not that every woman will; it's that any woman can. And
But
when
that's
we
the
look
same
at,
feminist theory. Any man
yeah,
can
but
rape you.
here's
Ladies,
hear me out though,
watch
Lauren.
out.
Is that the women who are on the women have the societal have the state behind them. The MGTOW side, the black pill side, they do not have the state behind them.
But you
So
don't need
when
the state
if a
to
woman,
help
like when
you
we
in a
had the
random
Me Too
hotel
thing,
room.
when Me Too got weaponized and all that other stuff that was going on during 2017, 2018, Brett Kavanaugh and all that, that is a side of feminism that the the quote unquote parallel in MGTOW or in the black pill side are never going to be able to sort of match. So when it comes to actually enforcing those belief sets, it's going to be prioritized on the gynocentric side of that whole argument.
Okay, this makes sense to me because this was an ideology that or a perspective I used to take in a lot of ways is I don't need to worry about bad ideas or ideas that are being misapplied so long as they don't really have state power. And that was definitely something like absolutely, of course, ideas that have the power of the state and popular media are more dangerous, so to speak, and that they can wield their power better.
Hmm?
But I've found that because these things shift and cultures shift so quickly, it is actually just better practice to oppose bad ideas and bad approaches in general, whether they are state approached or not, state supported or not, especially because they can still impact the individual life.
Hmm?
Small politics, individual friendships, individual relationships. An abusive parent that's living in the middle of nowhere doesn't. They're not going to be having the power of the state dictating or allowing them. In fact, there's probably going to be a lack of any observation. Living in a trailer house somewhere, that like a lot of abuse can happen outside the state. I know libertarians and anarchists will hate to hear that, but the state is comprised of humans who decided to just take abuse to a mass level. So I
Well,
think that we need to oppose an idea whether or not it's supported by the state if it's bad logic that's gotten us to that idea. So whether it's feminism or whether it's radical MGTOW.
You are that, and I get what you're saying. But when you are talking about family formation, when you're talking about which the bedrock for that has been monogamous marriage for a very long time, certainly in Western culture has been the sort of the foundation, the bedrock of Western society has been a monogamous, I say nuclear family, but certainly a monogamous marriage with, children, parental investment, everything else that goes into that. Um, I have argued with some very prominent Christian guys who still want to say that marriage. I've taken the side against marriage, even though I have like a damn good 25-year marriage. This is coming from a guy who has
We're
a good
all
marriage.
hypocrites, aren't we?
Yeah, well, they want to call me a hypocrite, but the thing is like people will say, Rollo, if you found yourself divorced, or if you're God forbid widowed or whatever, would you ever get married again? And I told them no, absolutely 100% no. And I would say that because I can't endorse marriage the way we do it now, because men today have more authority over their own lives outside of marriage than they do inside of marriage today. And that's the bigger problem when we talk about like the state and everything else. And I don't want to get too, political or whatever, but like when we talk about family formation, when we talk about putting, having kids and increasing like fertility counts or whatever it is, because we're below replacement levels fertility right now. We have to look at how we do marriage. We're already trying to find like, new cutesy ways to say, oh, it's about poly relationships, or, alternative relationship styles and things like that go completely against human evolution. But we don't care because it doesn't have anything to do with sort of, quote unquote, traditional marriage. And it's not so much the tradition part as it is that it is just simply a bad deal for most guys to get into. Ergo, you have the lowest marriage rate of all time. The last record I saw, I wrote about this in my fourth book. We're at 6.5% when it comes to the marriage rate right now, which is as low as it's ever been since they started recording marriage rates way back in like the 1800s. So why is that?
Now, do you think that's women's fault?
What's that?
Do you think that's women's fault, or do you think it's a total
I think it
aligning
is.
of both genders?
I think it is. I don't say it's women's fault in particular, but I think it's gynocentrism's fault. So once we started making marriage a liability rather than a responsibility, or rather than an incentive for guys. It used to be, prior to the sexual revolution, it used to be that men would, the only way to get to sex, really, the legitimate way to get to sex, was to get married.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a trade-off. There was a balance between those two. And so when people talk about like patriarchy, I'm all for patriarchy. And I don't mean that in the sense like, oh man, he wants to be, like men are superior. That's not what I'm talking about. Patriarchy is a much more balanced system than feminism ever will be, than gynocentrism ever will be, because it only focuses on one side.
Are you for like kind of the trad version of marriage then? Like what would be the ideal woman to marry for a man?
Right. Well, here's the way we used to do it, and here's the way some cultures still kind of do this. But we talk about, patriarchy. They smash the patriarchy. It's this horrible, evil, tyrannical type thing. It's like, no, idealized patriarchy is a balance. And what that meant was that the guy, to get to sex, to get to the point where his incentive to be in a marriage was to, well, first of all, to get sex, obviously, but he also had responsibility that had a concurrent authority from within that marriage. So it was daddy, daddy gets to make the decisions. Daddy is the head of household. Dad gets to do, dad's the one who's making the money. Women had to be dependent, quote unquote, dependent on that guy. So when we talk about strong, independent women today, what is that independence of? It's of men. It's not about like, oh, well, I make my own money, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. The reason why you do that, the reason why you're proud of that, the reason why you're sort of, filled up with pride over this whole thing is because you are independent of the provisionings that men used to provide for women. Women are still looking for that guy. They still want the guy who makes a lot of money, who wants to make them a kept woman, who wants to, still wants to be the classical patriarch. They just want old school benefits with new school.
So I'm still, what is the ideal wife was the question. Like, what is the woman that a man should marry?
The ideal wife is the one that knows that her role as a feminine woman. That's the ideal wife.
And is it a woman that will, like you said, there has to be steps for a man to get sex. Like she'll wait, and
there was a definite qualification that had to go along with that. But the problem that you're running into here is I think that everybody glazes over right now because they go, oh my gosh, I can't believe he just said that, women should be submissive. I'm not saying submissive. I'm just saying that they should know the role. They should be, that's femininity is that role. Motherhood is that role. Family formation is that role. And there's a lot of things that go along with that. But the problem is that right now, under patriarchy, that man had responsibility. That's the first thing TradCon say. We could solve all this stuff, or like all these men are like, effeminate manginas. They are all, they need to man up, but yet we tell generation after generation of guys to man down. And the reason for that is because we think that we believe in an egalitarian. We think that an egalitarian balance is actually the ideal state, as opposed to the natural state, which is men being responsible for their families. Yes, responsibility is very important for men. But the problem that they're having right now is that responsibility used to come with an authority that allowed men to meet those responsibilities.
So are you a TradCon? Do you support the TradCon belief that there should be barriers to marriage, that men should be respected by their wives, the primary earners, that they get sex when they get married? Like, do you agree with that belief? Is that your ideal world?
It's not my ideal world, but I do see that as the old order ideal. Okay, that's 20th century thinking right now.
But you don't think the world can ever be like that again?
I don't think we can go back to that. No, I do not believe that we can go back to that, simply because we now have the internet. Okay, we now have access to information where we understand our natures well enough. So, like, for instance, like prearranged marriages, I understand the utility behind those. Women will lose their minds over the fact that, like, daddy gets to decide who you're going to go and marry. I understand why that formality or that tradition used to exist, but today you're simply not going to go back to it because it seems draconian. It seems horribly, wrong to women to be able to say, hey, okay, you're going to marry this guy and you're not going to marry this guy. But I understand why that is. Premarital sex. I totally understand why there were religious proscriptions against premarital sex. I understand it from a practical sense, like what was the latent purpose of it. But I think right now it is entirely impractical to revert back to that right now.
Right. Because that's actually a big question I wanted to talk about today is I hear so many Manosphere guys, and it blows my mind every time. They are like, bang your way around the world, my dudes. We're gonna bang every woman on this planet, and then when we're 40, we will settle down with an 18-year-old virgin. And I'm like, my guys, are you having sex with like the same 20 girls? Because if you all bang your way around the world, there's not gonna be all these virgins left to marry you. And I'm sorry, but an 18-year-old virgin girl does not want to marry a 40-year-old STD-ridden rando. Like, that's not... It just seems like the most bizarre life plan I've ever heard. And also, men get damaged from lots of sex. And sure, I can completely acknowledge there are biological aspects that are different between men and women in that, and women are more attached and more affected by it, but men are human too. STDs, children, all of these emotional bonding, lots of things that impact it. So whenever I hear Manosphere guys go on about how good traditional marriage is and how good it is for when women make men wait, I think about that. And I did a little look of your rules in your book, and some of them I agree with, some of them I think are good advice, but rule 3, you probably know what I'm going to bring up, is don't wait for sex. Ignore any woman who makes you wait for sex, or by her actions implies she is making you wait for sex, the sex is never worth the wait. So to
Yes.
me, that seems like you are creating a world or exacerbating a world that you don't like, in which you and other men feel a victim of. Because what that signals to women is, when we go to a club, when we meet a guy and we ask him to come back to our place, in fact, it's usually not the woman, it's usually a guy who's like, please have sex with me. We don't get the guy who kisses us on the cheek and says, listen, I'm not interested in a harlot. I'm not interested in a girl that's gonna
Always
sleep
the
with me on the
does that.
first night. It's always the other way around. So what women are being signaled to is, I am going to lose a guy if I don't sleep with him on the first night. And then you're
Mhm.
creating a bunch of women that sleep with men on the first night and don't settle down, and emotionally damaged people that get abandoned constantly and ghosted, and it's just pain on both sides. And I really get frustrated with the pickup artistry community for that. So
Well,
defend yourself. Take the stand.
welcome to the global sexual marketplace, Lauren. It used to be, prior to the internet, prior to social media, prior to everything, prior to being able to talk on Discord and everything else. We used to be limited to local sexual marketplaces, and that actually made sense, right? I mean, you don't want to be the neighborhood boy, you don't want to be the loose girl in your social circle, but now your social circle is the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
So let me explain a few things about that too. That's actually one of them. I kind of figured you were going to bring that one up. That is like one of the most contentious of my 9-iron rules of Tomasi. So the rule is this, okay? It's that any woman that makes you wait for sex or by her actions implies that she's making you wait for sex, the sex is never worth the wait, okay? It's not that I'm not telling guys, and women kind of misinterpret this because it goes against what their innate sexual strategy would otherwise tell them to do, right? But what it is it's not a test about, I'm not telling guys go fuck anything that has two legs on two legs. Like, go get as much pussy as you possibly can. That's not what it's about. That rule is to determine genuine desire. And if you look at the rest of that rule, if you look at the rest of what I described there, it's like genuine desire, sexuality is a visceral, chemical process. There's an urgency that goes along with that. And the reason why I wrote that rule way back in the day is because that a lot of guys were waiting, 6-8 months, trying to figure it out, right? They're trying to figure they would go they would invest and wait and wonder why they weren't getting laid, or they would get in the friend zone or whatever else. And I kept telling these guys, I said, there's something that this woman is going through. If a woman wants to have sex with you, she's going to find a way to have sex with you. Right? If she has genuine desire for you, she's going to find a way to go around that. Women,
what if there
break
is genuine desire and she is just a woman who has maybe been in a bad relationship before, where she had sex on the first date because the guy read your book and then abandoned her the next day? I'm just teasing. But and she's like, I can't do that because I won't know if he's actually into me, and I could get STDs, I could get pregnant. I want to be smart, but I really love this man, I really want to be with this man. Oh, he's now left me because he's now assumed that there's no genuine desire from her because she won't sleep with him right away. Like, can you see how that would cause some miscommunication between a really good partner?
And this is another maxim from the red pill, is that women break rules for alphas and they make more rules for betas. When you have, and especially today, is there the rare girl who is, the good church girl who's, finds a guy in Bible study and she says, I really want to have sex with this guy, but I'm going to wait. I'm going to hold myself for marriage. Honestly, I have heard guys tell me that they are virgins and they are waiting for marriage to have sex more often than I've heard women say this. Because for women, it's about escalation. They have to be able to outcompete that one girl who wants to get with that same guy. And so if that one girl's gonna put out and you're not gonna put out, well, you're at a disadvantage at that.
Right, and who has set the terms of that competition is the question, right? Because it used to be the outcompeting was, I'm going to outcompete her in being graceful and feminine, because that is what men are desiring and asking of me right now. And when we talk about, we want a society in which men set standards, we want a society that is not so gynocentric, well, men are setting the sexual rules right now, and they are setting sexual rules and enforcing sexual rules that are feminist because they are benefiting from them in the short term. And in the long term, they are causing all of these sexual problems in which, as you're saying, now it's just women competing for sex right away, abandoning, ghosting, all of this stuff. And it's hard to find the genuine people that are interested in you and those who just want to sleep around. But is there not a level of responsibility from men to also set those standards of, actually, you know what, I kind of am into the woman who's going to wait. That's not for me. And I genuinely believe women would change their behavior.
And there's plenty of guys who will say that too. Especially if they think it'll put them at an advantage. There's a lot of guys who, they make their necessity a virtue, is what happens. Again, the reason for that that rule is to determine genuine desire. I want a girl who is so into me and so has a genuine burning desire for me that she is willing to break rules to get to having sex.
But how can you distinguish that woman from a girl who just sleeps with everyone on the first night?
Well, exactly, and that's the other thing is like, this is 2021 right now. At this stage, does it actually even make that much difference at this point? Because you got women who are on OnlyFans right now who will be happy to, take, small fortunes from, well, maybe until October, but, take small fortunes from guys for just the idea that they might be able to have sex with them. They're not actually having sex with them, but they are promising them the idea or the fantasy that they could have sex with them. So it comes back to like what I can't read the minds of every woman in the world, but what I can say is this, is that when guys are made to wait for sex, it is generally true. The predictive framework is that there's something that is mitigating that at that time. She has a better deal. I talked about this on a recent show that I was on about like, why is it that women flake? And every single woman on that panel said the reason that they flake is because they had a better option, or they had something that was mitigating the decision to go out with one guy and not the other guy. And when we live in a gynocentric social order right now, women are spoiled for choice when it comes to those things, especially young women who are either sexually active or are at least implying that they could be sexually active. So do you want to, I get this all the time. Women will tell me, well, if men would behave, then women would be better women. And it's like, well, at what point, like what stage is it men's responsibility? Like, are we?
It's everyone's responsibility.
Are we our sister's keeper? Or am I my sister's keeper? Or is she my keeper? You see what I'm saying? So if I say, women.
If you want women to set the rules, then we can have that gynocentric world. That's fine. But if you guys want to do this whole "we're alpha, we run the world, we need to get out of this gynocentrism," then maybe you do need to take that mind of "I am my sister's keeper." Step up, take that responsibility, because there's a whole lot of talking about how we want men to run the world, and then a whole lot of complaining about, oh man, well then we have to do all the work. Well, yeah.
That's kind of a moot point when men don't have the authority to do that in the first place.
Well, you do. In those personal, if you are not willing to do things on a personal level, at the smallest level, you're not going to make them realized on a larger level.
80%, at least 80% of guys do not have that authority. They have no say whatsoever in that. In fact, that's why they rationalize and convince themselves that the
men
longer
have
they
no
wait,
ability to wait for sex. They have no. I know men have ability to wait for sex, and in fact, as a woman, from my perspective, if a guy has no capability to wait for sex, if I tell him, listen, like, no, not right away. Usually, I find. I find that unattractive if a guy is like suddenly freaks out or something. I find that really unattractive. Like, you have no control over yourself. You have no time preference, right? And time preference is a very high quality thing. Like, you aren't interested enough in me to wait, right? So that seems like low value behavior to me. That would signal that to me. And maybe that's just me as an individual woman.
The high value guy that you would want to get with in the first place is already most likely is giving you cues saying that he understands women and has the interests of other women to begin with. So that conversation with the guy that you would want to get with in the first place rarely ever happens, because you don't have to, the very fact that the guy would say, hey, I'm not waiting for sex, that right there disqualifies him as being a high value guy that you would want to be invested in the first place.
Precisely.
Guys who are already high up, alpha, they have the interest of other women, and women instinctively pick up on the fact that there are other. It's called pre-selection, right? They instinctively understand that there are other women out there that want to get with this guy. It's called competition anxiety. They see, they go, well, this guy is giving me these cues. Clearly, he makes a lot of money. Clearly, he's jacked. Clearly, he's an ideal guy that I would really like to get with. And he's not going to say, okay, well, if you don't want to have sex with me, that conversation doesn't happen. He just doesn't talk to you anymore. You're pushed out and another girl comes in.
Right, but
And
if
that's
he's
how
actually interested in me, so this is the reverse of what you're suggesting. You're trying to see if a woman has attraction, and I, as a woman, am trying to see if a man has commitment. And in order to find that, I have to say, hey, no, I don't want to have sex right away. Like, are you actually interested in me? Because I know you have a lot of other options because you're a high value male. So, will you just sleep with me tonight and go run to other options the next day because you're not actually that into me? Or are you into me? So, can you see how that would?
Well, you're looking at it from a moralistic perspective, first of all, A. Second of all, is that if a now, this is just I'm going to quote my friend Sterling Cooper here because he actually answered this question not too long ago. Is that if a woman wants to have sex with him on the first night, he was telling me that he feels flattered by that because she knows what's up. She knows that to get to him, to get his interest, to see if possibly there's going to be some sort of long-term relationship as a result of that she's going to show genuine desire by wanting to have sex with him right then and there. Now, I've talked about this as well. I'll give you this story as well. As I've talked about my poor girls. Like I worked in the alcohol industry for a long time, and I've heard them talk to each other and talking about like, hey, have you ever had sex with a guy on the first date? And they giggle and kind of Twitter about it, and they say, yeah, of course I have, but not if he was boyfriend material. So what they're saying is that if the guy's hot and he was fun, and he looked like he was going to be a good lay right then and there in a short-term sexual urgency sense, yes, they would have sex with that guy on the first night. But if he showed boyfriend material, if he in some way looked like he might be good for the long term, they wouldn't have sex with him. They wouldn't give him the sex that they would give to the guy who they thought would be a good, fun one-night stand. Which, of course, is cognitive dissonance to the highest degree, right there. But we laugh it off, and that's simply really the strict. When you talk about hypergamy, it's alpha seed and beta need.
Well, because yeah, if a woman sleeps with a guy right away because it's just convenient, then if a woman not convenient. If a woman sleeps with a guy right away because she's desperate and knows she's competing and she wants to get his interest, then that tells me, yeah, she's desperate and she doesn't have the options. But if a woman says, no, actually, it's the reverse of what you're suggesting for women. No, actually, I'm going to wait because I have lots of other options that are willing to wait for me and are willing to be exclusive with me. It is the opposite of what the alpha male does, or the alpha female behavior is, no, I'm not going to beg you to be with me by sleeping with you and hoping you pick me out of all of these other girls. And I don't know why a guy would want that kind of girl who feels the need to, like, I am so low value that I will sleep with any guy just to hope that he will date me. Like, I wouldn't want to, if I were a guy, and maybe that's just me, if I were a guy, I wouldn't really want to date a girl who were that desperate, because that would scream some sort of underlying condition to me.
Well, the problem that we run into right now is that there are plenty of women between the ages of, say, like 29 and about 31 years old right now who have gone through guy after guy after guy giving away the sex that they limited from the guy that they actually want to spend the rest of their lives with. So from a statistical standpoint right now, when women get to be, past 31 or 32 years old and they're looking for and complaining about why they can't find the right guy or the nice guy, that is the guy that is the quote unquote boyfriend material. That's the guy that they wanted to settle down with. That's not the guy that they wanted to have, hot, fun sex with when they were in their crazy college years, and now they're ready to get serious about. So is it, again, when you're talking about a society that prioritizes the sexual strategies of women above that of men, is it men's responsibility for that? Or should those guys say, no, I'm not gonna settle down with you. I don't have any obligation to marry you. I don't have any obligation to give you any kind of commitment, because your sexual strategy from the time you were, say, 18 till about 28 years old had nothing to do with planning for the long term. So if you want to put it in,
they are participating in the system.
Again, genuine desire.
But then it's a two-way street, because if they're spending their whole 20s banging women and not staying with them and sleeping their way through until they get, like, I mean,
those guys,
they're creating the system as much as women are by making those poor decisions. Like, the guy would literally be there shrugging, like, I was the poor decision you made. There are two people that are having sex, and they are both responsible. Especially if the manosphere want to treat women like these. And I read the comments on your video, and I know they don't represent you, but men are like, women need to be treated like children. They need to be guided because they don't know how to control their lives or what to do. Well, if you guys really believe that, then guide them. Don't throw up your hands and be like, well, you made these decisions and you ended up here. Well, you're saying that women are children and they need to live in a world that men control them, and then you guys are not willing to take any of the responsibility to do that. Well, don't bitch about it if you're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah. Well, here's what I'm going to tell you is that it's what we call the 80-20 rule. Okay. 80% of guys, and I can show you this statistically through, there's a great book called Dataclysm. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but statistically speaking, women do not want to have anything. They find 80%, sometimes 85% of men unattractive, not average.
I'm glad you brought this up.
Unattractive. Okay. So you're looking at a percentage of guys, at least in Western cultures, let's say, between, somewhere between let's just say 20% of guys are the guys who can actually realize what you're talking about in the first place. And those are the guys that women prioritize for short-term sex. So it's not like 80, it's not like the majority of guys are out there going, we're going to go get ours. Let's go out there and have just this wanton rampant sex. Clearly, we can see that when you look at the GSS studies where we see that, well, first of all, this Generation Z right now is having less sex than any other generation before it. And the men of that generation are having less sex, that if any at all, between the ages of 18, about 24, 29, somewhere around there. But yet, women are the ones that are actually having the sex. And so who are they having sex with? Because they're certainly not the 80% guys. They're having sex with the guys who are the top 20% of guys. Those guys, whether or not they are gaming the system or whether or not they are being chosen to be the ones to have sex, whether it's casual sex or if it's later on it becomes some sort of committed sex after that, it's really kind of irrelevant in a society that prioritizes women's sexual strategy above men's. Men don't have that effect. It's nice to be able to write. How is this
society not supporting men's sexual strategy when men's sexual strategy, especially since the dawn of time, has been sleep with as many women as possible to get my seed in them and have babies? I mean, maybe abortion clinics are hurting men's sexual strategy, but women's sexual strategy is try to settle down and get married for support and stay with the tribe because I'm not as strong as men. I can't hunt. I have to ensure that I have a social circle that I can work with it. So I actually do not see how this culture is supporting women's sexual strategy at all.
You asked me this great question just a little while ago, and it was about patriarchy and what's the ideal situation. Okay, so let me explain a couple things to you. You're correct. The natural innate sexual strategy for men is unlimited access to unlimited sexuality. And there's going to be guys that, I'm better than that. I've evolved above that bullshit. And I'll tell you why. All I have to do is point out why Pornhub and all these other porn sites that are free 4K streaming that you can go get pornography anytime you want. That right there pretty much shows that men's innate mating strategy is unlimited access to unlimited sexuality. Women have always been the gatekeeper of sex. So it's their sole. That's unless men forcibly take it away from them, women are the primary sexual selectors when it comes to the human reproductive process. Most guys would love to be able to have unlimited access to unlimited sexuality. That's why porn's great. Unlimited access, unlimited sexuality. It's all right there. It's virtual, but there you have it. For women, it's the other way around. It's about quality, not quantity. So men tend to be what would be called R selected, whereas women tend to be more K selected. They're looking for quality, they're looking for parental investment, whereas men, we can potentially, produce thousands of offspring for one ejaculate, right? So that's sort of our spread the seed kind of not mentality, but sort of our biology. Got it. For women, it's the other way around. There's alpha seed and beta need. And I'm saying that in the nice way. So it's looking for the best short-term genetic material that women can get, balanced by the guy who has the 3 Ps, okay? Which is parental investment, protection, and provisioning, because women are the vulnerable sex. Women have the higher investment cost when it comes to reproduction. It takes 9 months to gestate a child. And during that time, particularly in our ancestral past, that could have been a death sentence for women if they picked the wrong guy,
Yeah.
or even if they picked the right guy, it still could be a death sentence because he was just simply not strong enough to, fend off the saber-toothed tiger or the incoming tribe or whatever else. So there is a selectivity that being the vulnerable sex has modified that woman's sexual strategy so that she's looking for the guy who has that provisioning capability, but he also still has to be hot. And he also still has to be virile. He also has to have good testosterone levels, and he's got to be taller, and he's got to have the six-pack abs, and he's got to have some sort of physical prowess.
Guys always bring this up as if they don't have expectations. You guys have your expectations, absolutely. You mentioned that Plenty of Fish study. That's the women rate like 80% of guys as being unattractive, which I'm so glad you brought it up because I remember reading that study. Really interesting. So it's absolutely true that women did rate men lower and men were more fair. To be fair to how men rated women, there's a lot of editing that goes on in those photos. So even women that would normally be 3s can edit themselves up to a 9 with the whole Photoshop apps. But even so, when it came to actually messaging people, individuals, so women who were like rated a 5 out of 10 were far more likely to message another 5 out of 10 than a man who was a 5 out of 10 was to message a 5 out of 10. So when it came to actual contact, which I think is the important aspect, the majority of men were more likely to actually message and engage with the 1% of women. Whereas women may have rated men lower, but they were more likely to engage with the men that were in the lower categories.
Men always have to be in what's called what I call the burden of performance. So they're the ones who are expected to initiate. They're the ones who are expected to act. Men do. When women talk, men do. That's essentially what it comes down to. Is that when we're talking about dating and mating, men have to show off, right? We have to prove our quality. We have to in some way have, whether that's physical prowess or that's financial prowess or that's creative intelligence, that kind of stuff. So essentially whether or not people are responding to whoever or whatever, when we look at how women select guys, women do not have men do not have an attraction floor. Women do have an attraction floor. So what they're doing is they're looking for a guy who is at their level or above their level. It's the only thing that really simply makes sense. So when we're talking about hypergamy versus men's unlimited access to unlimited sexuality, not all men obviously can do that. Not all men can be the guy who is in the top 20% of guys that women want to, strip his clothes off and have sex with them and have babies with them and live happily ever after. So what guys have to do is figure out creative ways to figure out how to increase their value so that women will pay attention to them. And way back in the day, maybe it was building a house. Maybe it was, increasing wealth, increasing some way for making a woman more convenient, right? It's resource transfer, it's talent transfer, that kind of stuff. But what you asked me before, so let me just clarify a few things here. Is like not all guys can do that. Not all guys are going to be able to have unlimited access to unlimited sexuality, at least prior to, internet pornography. And so what guys had to do is the guys who did not have that access had to figure out ways to figure out how to get to that access, how to solve their reproductive problems. And so when we talk about like monogamy, we look at that and we go, this seems like a really good idea because the most amount of guys are going to have the most amount of access to being with a woman. So when we look at, like, say, traditional marriage, just like what you're saying before, what were the things that balanced those things out? Now, the things that made men sort of dogs, right? Like being able to just, sleep around and whore around all the time. We had the church that would bar that. We had social stigmas that will bar against that. We had the idea that monogamy was supposed to be the ideal when it comes to love and marriage and commitment and everything else. So if you get enough guys to believe in that, that is a buffer against the worst aspects of unlimited access to unlimited sexuality. This is prior to the sexual revolution. This is prior to where we are right now. For women, it's also the other way around. So when we talk about, the church used to repress women's sexuality, or we live in such a horrible, patriarchal, misogynistic society that, keeps the woman down and represses her. Really what's being repressed is the worst aspects of her own sexual strategy. And so how do we make that work between men and women? We used to make that work through, so like I said, social stigmas, or we would make it work through the church. And how did we do that? We formalized it in an agreement of vows for marriage. So when we bring the two, a man and a woman together, we say, okay, here's my promise to you is I will forsake all others in sickness and in health till death do us part, for richer, for poorer, all the great, traditional value, whatever vows that you have. A lot of those are buffers against the other sexes, the worst aspects of the other sex's sexual strategy. So for women, it was the other way around, right? It was, for richer, for poorer, blah, blah, blah. But it was to ensure that she was going to be taken care of. Now, why would that be? Well, because women's sexual, marketable years between, say, like 18 and 28 are very perishable. When that woman has another 90 years, I hope you live a long life, but when you have a much longer lifespan than your sexual market value peak years, which let's say maybe is 10 years today, 18 to 28, and then you're going to live, let's say you live to be another 90 years old, so you got another 80 some odd years or 70 some odd years before, for the rest of your life that you're going to need long-term security. And either you have to provide that for yourself as a woman, or a man had to do that, in times prior. How did you do that? Well, we used to have buffers, and marriage was one of those buffers. We have ruined those buffers now. So as a result, we say, okay, well, marriage isn't worth it anymore. The incentives are gone. It's too dangerous, blah, blah, blah. The marriage rates are in the toilet right now. But those are the things that used to buffer those sexual strategies. So when we're talking about, what's men's innate strategy?
We're talking a lot about history, and I understand all of these points, but what I'm curious about is it seems like your solution to this collapse of structure is not to try to do better in our personal lives, to put some structure in our personal lives. It sounds like you want to teach people how to operate in the chaos in a way where they are contributing to the chaos.
Adaptation.
Yeah, but
That's
I believe that you can kind of be a conscientious objector in modernity. You can be a part of it, you can dip your toes in it, you can try to influence it well in your own life, living. So I'm a pessimist for the world, but an optimist for my own life, because I can control my own life. I can control the things I do. It seems like a lot of the PUA advice is go with the world and have your crack at it, have fun. It's like it's what the purge, like, go with it, don't stay home and make cookies that night, here's how you can kill best because everyone else is doing it too. And to me, like, it literally just feels like a tit for tat, back and forth. Well, if women are going to do things wrong, then we're going to take advantage and do it wrong back. And
again, you're viewing this from a perspective of like PUA or running game or whatever.
Correct.
Else,
which is
now
big part.
Okay, yeah, I understand that, but again, that's adaptation to the sexual marketplace that a lot of these guys find themselves in. Most of these guys are never going to apply that. They're going to use game, or they're going to use the red pill to certainly improve their lives and to understand their own nature and to understand women's nature, and then to adapt that to whatever it is that they're going to do. Most of these guys are not going to become like uber players who are going to go. I would worry less about guys turning into these unconscionable assholes who are going to just get as like I said, bang anything on two legs. What I'm more worried about is guys offing themselves because they get zeroed out because they didn't see it coming. And that's usually like people when they tell me that they they were going to kill themselves and they stopped it, they canceled their plans to do so. It's usually because something clicked for them and now they understand their situation into which that they're in right now. So it's not like they're going to go out there and say, "Oh wow, I'm just going to go out and kill it in the clubs or something like that." Some guys do, yeah, but most guys who are in that 20%, just like you said, they're not in the manosphere. They're not the guys who are going like, say, hey, I really need to learn how to pick up girls. Because they're already getting it. They're the ones that are already out there enjoying it, because most women are fighting for those guys as it is right now.
It's tough,
women would rather share those guys than be saddled with the faithful beta loser right now.
Okay, so here's a point I want to make that I think you'll be interested in, and I want to see if you've witnessed this or heard this from other women. I have dated men that would be considered in like the lower tier of men. Like, my girlfriends would be like, why are you dating him, right? And I like just genuinely was into his personality. And when I have dated those guys and it's ended for one reason or another, one of the reasons actually in one of these relationships was because I found out he was using pickup artist tactics to get me, and I was just so freaked out because the mask fell and it was like he couldn't keep up the quotes and the things he was reading.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
I found if I dated a guy that was like a 10 out of 10 on the scale versus on the lower half, when a breakup happened or something went wrong, the guy who was a 10 out of 10, perfectly fine, a-okay, treat me lovely after, you have a good one. You know, it was great taking you on dates. Lovely lady, could have a chat now and be lovely. The guys who were on the lower end of the scale, it would go full psychotic mode. Like, I'm going to ruin your life. I'm going to text you every day from like at 3 a.m. 7,000 texts. And I think it comes down to, and so, you know what? I've actually had moments like that where guys have been more handsome and been like that, but it comes down to that insecurity. Insecurity, it doesn't really matter that much how a guy will be in a relationship based on his looks. It really matters if he's secure in himself or not. Because insecure guys, it's scary for women to date insecure guys because they act in insecure ways that can be really
Especially
aggressive.
today.
So when
Mhm.
when we talk about, these guys are having a horrible time, and don't get me wrong, the suicide rates are horrific for men. I understand, like, not feeling like someone is attracted to you or like you have touch from the other sex. That is a horrific thing, and I can't even, that would be really painful. But there needs to be a level of understanding that it's also scary for women, and that's why when men are insecure, they can be very scary for women to date and dangerous in some cases.
Well, first of all, like to your first point, which
Hmm.
was, the guy was using PUA tactics or whatever. Um, that there's especially in 2021 right now, there's a qualifiable difference between guys who understand and internalize game and then the guys who use like rote memorization or they're running lines on you. It's like it's
Hmm.
classic old school like PUA kind of stuff, run the cube on you or some very few guys are actually doing that. But the difference is that there's guys who understand game and they understand how really what game really boils down to is like social intelligence, and they have the social intelligence to know that it's part of what they're about. Like people ask me this all the time. They'll say, "Rollo, I would hate to be Rollo Tomasi because he has to game his wife all the time." I was like, "I don't game my wife whatsoever. It's who I am, right? I am the game." And I know that sounds like I'm glossing myself, but I am the game, meaning that I don't like my wife gives me a shit test. I don't go over here to my notebook and go, "Oh well, I got choice number 1, 2, or 3 to respond here, and let me read this and memorize it, and then I'll get back to you." That it's becomes it becomes internalized after a point. Once you become more red pill aware and you understand yourself as what like men's innate natural nature and women's innate natural nature, and you have responded to it enough times, and it's a lived experience really, but once you have done it enough times, and yeah, it might start as rote memorization, but once it becomes internalized and it becomes a part of who you are, of your natural response, it's not game anymore. It's just who you are. It's just your personality. And so, yeah, I can understand why that would be very off-putting, because what happens is the mask falls off, right? Because it's an
Yes.
act. And guys
Correct.
have said this to all day. Like, this is one of the most common complaints guys have. I can't keep up the act forever. Can I ever be myself? Can I ever let down my hair? Can I ever get comfortable? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, it's an act to you. It's just rote memorization to you at this point, and that's the problem. When women are like, if it had just been sort of natural for him to be the way that he is, you would think he was authentic, and that's just his personality. And that's how he came to that is kind of irrelevant because you're in the moment and you're playing the game along there with him at the same time. But once it becomes an act, then it confirms everything else. Oh, he's not who he said he was. And that's very important for women. Women need natural cues. They need to understand that you are who you say you are. Women
Yeah.
can go get boob jobs and put on makeup, and they can go put on high heels, and they can be as duplicitous and as imaginative as they want to be, but men are not allowed to do
Okay,
that. You
is a boob job really hiding your personality though? Like, I don't think a guy wearing a hat if he's bald is hiding his personality.
I get that, and I'm not saying stop doing that. Please do keep getting boob jobs, really, ladies, and please keep putting makeup on as
Ladies,
well. I'm not.
they're
I'm
giving
not. It's
people
not a
cancer.
complaint.
Be careful.
That's not that's not a complaint. It's just how we play the game. Okay. So for men always have to be authentic. We have to be the one. Like women give hell. I mean, in Australia, I think there's legislation on the books in Australia right now. Whereas if a woman has sex with a guy, and she does so, and the guy it was under false pretenses, meaning like the guy said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to make partner in the law firm or something
Right.
like that. Or I'm
Yeah.
going to be a surgeon or whatever." And then the next morning she wakes up and he goes, sorry, but I'm really a sandwich artist at Subway. That she would have had sex with him had she known. Now that's very opportunistic on the part of the woman right there, but that's how we're going to build legislation for consent. So now that consent has been removed because he's not actually the surgeon. He's actually a barista at Starbucks, and that's now technically construed as rape because I wouldn't have given him consent had I known he was a barista instead of going to make partner in the law firm. So that's how important those cues are, to the point where we're willing to put a man away. And then if you go and you look at there's a really great documentary. It's called India's Sons. And it's a personal friend of mine. Her name is Deepika Bardhawan. I hope I'm saying her name right. But she does documentary films about exactly this kind of situation that happens in India right now. And that's how important it is when we prioritize and we legislate according to women's sexual strategies. So when we have the guy who is not who he says he is, that's very important to women because that's part of women's intuition. There's nothing that is more self-satisfying for women than to think that she's figured out a guy based on her own feminine intuition. We build talk shows about that. Cheaters is a great example. Right? Daytime talk show is really the indignation factor that comes from shows like that is rooted in women trying to figure out, is this guy the real deal or is he not? So when you figured out that this guy was, playing games with you, or he wasn't really who he says he was, or the mask slips, right? And now he's, berating you on God knows how many social media platforms, and he's losing his shit. Well, he's doing that probably because he's been found out or he couldn't keep up the act. And now he's probably just as mad at himself as he is at you, because now you've confirmed that all women are bitches and he still can't figure out how to, get with a woman like you. And then you on the other hand have figured him out, and you're like, haha, he's actually not who he says he
and
is.
all men are liars, and you gotta
Now
be
he's
hunting.
insecure. Now he's incompetent. Yeah, the guys who are confident, the guys who play the game, who just get it. I think you probably read that part of my book as well. Women want a guy who just gets it, and that's part of it. It's got to be internal. He has to be who he says he really is. He understands women's nature, and he acts accordingly, naturally, innately. There's no mask to fall off.
This has brought me to another really, what I think is an interesting point. Of course, I'm sure everyone here and yourself, Neil Strauss and how he wrote the game. All these guys started following it, and they're like, I'm banging all these chicks, but life's still not going that great. So he wrote his follow-up book, and he's like, listen, like, having sex with a lot of women will make you confident for sure, and you're not going to get friend-zoned as much, but, it doesn't tell you how to keep a woman. The game doesn't tell you how to keep a woman. And I think that comes down to this. I did want to talk more about the Manosphere stuff, but in the pickup artist world, I mean, there are many ways to learn about a woman's personality, and while you can get some things from it, I do not think you can learn about a woman's soul or personality by fucking her. I don't think you can do that. And so a lot of this advice just coming down to, this is how you get the girl in bed, I don't think is building people up for their best relationships and best lives.
If you don't fuck her, you don't get to understand what her soul's about either. So that's the thing, is I've said before, is that sex is the glue that holds a relationship together, because it defines what a relationship between a man and a woman. Otherwise you're simply just roommates. That's the first thing.
Sure.
Guys in sexless marriage is the first thing they'll say is, I feel like I'm a roommate. She just walks past me, kind of thing. We don't have sex. Yeah. Because you're the fundamental nature of your relationship is not between husband and wife. It's not between boyfriend and girlfriend. There's no sex that is happening right there. And women hate it when I bring that up. But, and you can, Neil Strauss, I think, is probably one of the worst examples when it comes to like understanding what game, or even Mystery for that matter, who was also in the game as well. These are guys who were very, very good at game. They were very, very good at pickup, but they were still very, very blue pill. They were never really, they never understood because this was way before really red pill in the Manosphere was such a thing anyways. Remember that was the game came out in like 2005. So, one of the reasons why mystery was suicidal is because he thought he was going to be able to have all of his idealistic blue pill dreams and conditions come true because he's going to be able to use game to make those things happen. The
So
fact
what
of
do
the
you
matter
mean
is
he's going to be able to use game to get what do you mean by the blue pill? What is his end goal?
to get the girl to get his ideal girl, to get his dream.
So
In
dream
my
girl, get married, yeah.
right. So
Okay.
I said this in this
So
was
wait,
in my
is the
first
red
book.
pill not getting married and having a family anymore? I'm lost because the red pill when I knew it was settle down, white picket fence.
No, remember, the red pill is a praxeology. It is understanding women's nature and men's nature. What you're talking about is a practice. It is best practices, right? It's the concept. Okay. Well, how do I use this information? Red pill is just the information. And so what happens is, like, for instance, I know Neil Strauss he was married for a while. Now he's divorced. And he's not the most masculine guy in the world, let's just say. Okay. He was able to run game and to reliably, with some level of predictiveness, be able to get laid when he wanted to. Now, that's fine, and you can use that game to affect your own sexual strategy. But in the end, if you're trying to use that, you're using those game tactics, and you're still very blue pill rather than red pill. What you're doing is you're trying to use those practices and techniques to achieve a blue pill ideal goal. And the problem is, I tell guys this is that when you become red pill, there's this kind of like this step where a lot of guys want to kind of backpedal. They go, okay, Rollo, I got it from here. Thanks. Right. It's dream girls and children with dynamite. I think it was Ross Jeffries who said this. He said, teaching guys game is like giving children dynamite, because they have the keys to the castle, right? Or you give them the keys to the Lamborghini, but they don't know how to drive the Lamborghini. And so they end up wrapping the Lamborghini around a tree because they don't know actually how to drive the car. You gave them the car, here's game. Here's some techniques that'll get you the hottest girl you've ever got. And then they end up becoming suicidal because they can't keep the girl that was their dream girl. They can't make happen what they want to happen because they don't fundamentally understand women's nature or their own nature. They can figure out the behaviors they have to ape and the things they have to say to get the hottest girl they've ever got with. But once they get, the problem is you can get any girl, but that's the problem. You can get any girl.
I don't think you can math your way. Like, I don't think you can use a choose your own adventure book and click ABC to get a real, solid, genuine relationship.
Right. And so what happens is that they're still stuck in this blue pill world thinking that all I have to do is figure out how to use these game techniques and hold up the mask, right? Because at that point, it's still just rote memorization. At the end of the game, one of the things that Neil Strauss said he's worried about is that we're turning these guys into what are called social robots. And I understand that concern, because those social robots are still plugged into their old blue pill way of thinking, that they can have the white picket fence and the golden retriever in the front yard and 2.5 kids in the minivan and everything, and use game to have
like a life hack, put in the code, and then you can
exactly
hack life and get it, and they get angry when it doesn't work.
Right. And so what I've said is this: that the red pill is the theory and game is the practice, and either one is incomplete without the other. That's why Mystery was and is, I don't know if he still is, was suicidal back then, because he was trying to get this blue pill idealistic world with game without really being red pill and understanding his nature or understanding women's nature, which should be part of the progress when you're learning game. Now, the other thing is the opposite is true as well. If all you're ever doing is reading my book, and I want you to please read my book, buy my books, right? But if all you're ever doing is reading my books and you're stuck in the theory and you're not going out and you're not putting into practice, then what is it really useful for?
Okay, but how
One
is it
not complete without the other?
Let me ask, how is it that all of these guys reading none of the theory, watching none of the videos, there are a lot of them that are having perfectly happy, wonderful relationships, and then the guys that are reading all the theory, that are, and I understand they are reading the theory because they have trouble in the first place, but like I said, it seems like they're having more trouble than a lot of the guys who are just winging it.
Well, there are guys who are still going to be very blue pill, and they're still going to be successful at it, right? For whatever reason. We talk about the myth of the natural. There's the guys who, like, we say, oh, he's just naturally good with women, or he's just naturally good look. He's like Giga Chad, right? He's the guy like in high school, he was the high school quarterback or whatever, and girls just like threw themselves at him. That guy still had to learn game. He just learned it quicker than you did because he got a head start because he was genetically, yeah, he was
not just watching
he was rewarded sexually for being who he is. And those guys are actually some of, like, the guys who we consider naturals. Those guys get themselves into more trouble than guys who actually learn game. And I'll tell you why, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Those guys don't have to take classes on how to be a POA. They don't have to take classes as you were saying in the beginning of this whole show. Those guys they're not in the manosphere. They're busy, banging girl. They're the top 20%. So why would they? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if it ain't broke, don't ask questions about it. So yeah, are there guys who are sort of blue pill, still stuck in that blue pill, paradigm? But yeah, they're still pretty successful at it. But yeah, they become some of the worst white knights you'd ever want to meet, right?
So wait, I want
to red pill. Let me explain this just real quick. Red pill and blue pill and being alpha and being beta, those are mutually exclusive. So you can be a blue pill alpha and you can be a red pill beta. You can still be stuck in those kind of those loops or that way of thinking. And obviously, I think people tend to think that if I say red pill, then you must be alpha if you're red pill. No. There's lots of guys. Half of the black pill, half of the MGTOWs, they're all red pill. They're just betas that can't really figure out what else to do. They don't know what to do with it. Blue pill guys, exactly. There can be blue pill alphas, and those are the guys who will want to go, and fight for milady's honor. They're the worst white knights you'd ever want to meet. So don't think that those are mutually attached to each other.
Do you think so? If there's a father and he has a wife and a daughter, and he's not involved in any of these pills, or he's not ODing on Matrix stuff, and he gets online and someone says, all women are liars and whores, and he responds, I love my family, I love my wife and my daughter. Is he a blue pill beta? Or is
a lot of guys will tell him that he is. I don't know, because I don't know that guy and I don't know what his situation is. It could be that the guy is very blue pill. He just simply doesn't. It's never occurred to him to ask the questions that these guys have been asking. That's actually a very good question. Because you probably haven't read my fourth book right now, but with the rise of the internet, we have more access to data. We have more access to online forums. We have more access to communities of guys who will reinforce either biases or they'll commiserate, or maybe they want to lift each other up. It doesn't necessarily have to always be bad. But the fact is that we have access now to a set of the world's information just right in our cell phones right now. And we can look up those things. Why is it that I can write 4 books about what it is that I do? It's not that I'm not an evolutionary psychologist. I don't have a doctorate in anything, but I understand this well enough because I now have access to see to grasp all this and sort of connect the dots. I'm just connecting dots more or less. So, it's not like I don't have a doctorate in evolutionary psychology, but I'm well enough versed in all of this and have such enough interest in this that I can at least speak knowledgeably about it, or I can get the information if I don't know what that information is. And that's the thing, is when guys come into this who may have been outside of the manosphere, and they're just maybe me, right? I have a daughter. I've got a great 25-year marriage. I go on and I go to the black pill communities, and suddenly somebody says, oh, all these guys are, women are just, tricks and hoes, right? And I can go and say, hey, that's not necessarily true. My experience is this. Well, the way I'm responding might necessarily be from a blue pill perspective, because I never really thought about anything that they'd said up to that point. But I'm going to want to defend whatever my ego happens to be invested in at that particular time. Mm-hmm. So,
okay, so because I do need to wrap this up in a half hour. I've been enjoying this conversation, though. I want to talk about solutions. Like, we can talk about all the theory that the world's going to shit, relationships are going to shit. I don't think anyone will disagree with us that people are getting less happy, gender, there's so much gender confusion on all levels, sexual, relationship, what people's genders even are. So people just disagree on how we solve it. And when once again, going back to the manosphere and the general community, when I look at the content going to men, not all of it, there are good folks there, I'm sure, people. I know there are good people there, but a lot of it, and a lot of the stuff with the top views, I find traps men in these communities. I think it makes them worse off, makes it harder for them to date. So do you know, I'm just going to read out a list to you, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Do you know a guy named Coach Red Pill?
Do you want my assessment of these
guys?
I
just want to know if you know him. Do you know him?
I do know who he is. Okay, so let me explain something to you before you read the rest of these, and because I know what's coming next. So, here's the thing: is do I endorse these guys? Do I endorse? Okay, first of all, there are guys that are in the manosphere right now who have no business being in the manosphere. Coach Red Pill, sorry, you're one of them. You should not be. He is not a representative of what I would say. He's definitely a representative of what the manosphere has become, but in no way should be representing the red pill whatsoever. Because a lot of these guys, and I hate to gloss myself, but I can name names right now of guys who simply go use my book, read passages out of my book, claim it's their own, and then build a very successful YouTube channel accordingly. So, Coach Red Pill, go ahead. What else were you going to say?
I just find this some of the most shocking content I've ever come across. So these, and I'm going to just read out the titles for brevity's sake, but the titles absolutely match the content. I've watched the content. So here are some of his videos. Never date a single mother. Never date anyone at work. Never date or settle for fat women. Never date messy women. Beware your woman's friends. Never date and beware sad girls. Never date damaged goods. Never date hot girls. If you suspect a woman is on the spectrum, dump her. I'd be done. Never date quiet girls. Never date victims of sexual assault. He has like 1 billion people not to date. And then I went through his videos and, I could not find any on who to date. Exactly. And all of it, like I watched it, all of it were lists of his own personal unsuccessful relationships. So he's like, I dated a sad girl. I dated a quiet girl.
He's not a good representative. Now,
but he has so many viewers. I could not believe it.
Yeah, because it's red meat. That's why. It's red meat is what it is. I can here's the formula, Lauren, for a successful channel, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a red pill channel. It could be just any damn channel, but you have to throw on a thumbnail where you've got somebody going, or they got there has to be some look of shock. Okay, you have to use red and white text, and it usually has to be a sans serif font. And it has to be something very brief, but it has to be a complete loss leader on that. And then you have to use a title that can be no more than 18 characters long, and it has to be no more than 6 words long or so. I forget what the combination is, but it has to be brief, but it also has to be something that is indignation generating, and that's what will get people in. And generally what happens is that people will go, even if they click on it in the first place, just according to the title, it's likely that they're only going to watch that video for maybe the first, if you're lucky, 10 minutes. I do 2 forms of videos. I do one that's I do live streams that are very long, and then people lose their minds and say, I can't watch for 2 hours. I can't watch for 3 hours. Okay, fine. So I do a clips channel, or I'll go and I'll do like a short form, like a 40-minute kind of video, just so it's a little bit more digestible for people. And then I can do short form stuff that is like under a minute. I remember when YouTube put out the hashtag shorts, right? And you had to be a 1-minute video. And let me tell you something. I can go and put out a 53-second video, and people will still comment on it because they lose their minds over the title or over the thumbnail, and they never even watch the 53-second video because they'll chime in and they'll put a comment on that video that completely. It's evidence that they simply haven't watched the video. If you watched the video, you wouldn't own yourself with that stupid comment. But that's still it's a drive-by comment, and they want to feel heard. They want to have some sort of engagement. And it's like it's what I've called the TLDR generation. Too long, didn't read. And all they want to do is to be able to mouth off, pop off, and move on to the next one. And they're looking for whatever is the most indignation generating video that they can watch for a little while and then get off on that and move on to the next thing. That is what I call red meat. It's all sizzle and no steak. And so when you title those, like the titles you just rattled off to me, and some of them I might agree with what he's getting into, but those are meant to bait guys and bait people into watching those videos because they are in a market, in a hustle economy where subtlety has no place. I made this
And
comparison.
this is what I
okay?
mean by the system of the manosphere and how people make money and get men in there is actually
Not,
creating a
it's not,
financial incentive for ruining men's lives.
and it's not just the, and it's not just the manosphere.
Yeah.
It's in every freaking sphere is what it is. I made this comparison. I used to work in casino marketing. And when you go on a casino floor, it is sensory overload. Okay. There's video here and there's sounds here and there's colors and it's just all this, it's all bombarding you all at one time. You know, Wheel of Fortune, all this slot machines and everything, although there's no real change, but you kind of hear change somewhere on an audio track or something like that. It's just a sensory overload. And the one thing that working in casino marketing taught me was that there's no room for subtlety on the casino floor. There's three things that draw attention on the casino floor. The thing has to be red, it has to be on fire, and there has to be tits, okay? And preferably flaming red tits. That's what works best on the casino floor. No room for poetry, no room for allegory, no room for any kind of nuance whatsoever. If you want people to go to your machine or your table or to your event or whatever it is, it has to have flaming red tits. That's social media today. That is what that's what YouTube is today, is flaming red tits. And it is nothing but sensory overload. And if you go and you scroll through, nobody actually looks for anything on YouTube right now. They don't go say, I think I want to look up videos on cute cats or something. They don't. They look at whatever is fed to them by YouTube at that time. So if you've looked at a few Manosphere videos in the past, it's going to put that into your feed as suggestions for you to look at. No one is looking and no one's doing searches anymore. They're just looking at whatever's being suggested to them by YouTube at that time. Guys who are savvy enough to put out a good video or know how to build a channel do exactly what I just said. They're using those kinds of thumbnails and those kinds of titles. Tags, no difference whatsoever. Descriptions don't make any difference whatsoever. The most successful channels that are like 5 million strong are using exactly that formula, flaming red tits.
Yeah.
Because everything else is begging for your attention.
But the thing is, those flaming red tits, as they do at the casino, are actually ruining men's abilities to have relationships with women and get out of this sphere. And it's really, really sad and tragic. And it's making them very bitter and angry. And that's how I get emails of beheaded women in my inbox. Sadly, that's a very, very hurt man. I had just a few more titles and then a final bit of Coach Red Pill's thing that I thought was really symbolizes.
The most representative I can think of, but there's others ones that are actually worse than that.
So this is his advice for getting a woman. Get involved with girls you don't see yourself with long term and use them for mileage and experience. Treat women like nerds. Shame women. Never take advice from women. Never date a woman who competes with you. And autism is a choice. I just liked that title. But my favorite title out of all of his titles, which are all about how women are horrible and evil, was Women Hate Whiners. And I think that summed up the problem he is having with all of these women and then projecting onto all these other men and saying their experiences are going to be the exact same. Every single video is complaining about women. And that's the same thing with the MGTOW sphere. Once again, we want to go our own way, but we're also going to spend all our time complaining and bitching about women. We want to... it just seems so unhealthy to me, my friend. I think that there are MRAs out there that are trying to rally against male suicide. More power to you. There was a poor guy tried to open an abuse center for men or a center to help with men who had been abused in Ontario, I believe it was. Couldn't get support. Government weren't funding it. No public support. And he ended up killing himself. Like, dude, I wish that man was getting the support that some of these fucking channels that are saying they're helping men are getting. You know, people who rally for changing laws to make sure they're The same for men in court when it comes to, you know, equal rights to see children. I just absolutely support that stuff. But when I see all this stuff that is just like literally spiraling into insanity because of that financial incentive to create an us versus them mentality against women and portray women as these fembots that you can just put code into, and then men try and do it and it doesn't work because women are real complex people too and collapse and don't know what to do with themselves. It just seems so toxic, and it's been really nice talking to you and seeing you recognize that and talk about it in a human way with me, and not I wasn't sure what to expect going into
Did you
this.
did you take any time to actually watch any of those videos?
I did, and you know, like for example, the Quiet Girls one.
Mhm.
Um, he said that he used to be attracted to quiet women because he thought that they were having a lot of deep thoughts. He thought that they, you know, they weren't these outgoing, I just need to say what's on my mind, stupid shit. They had deep thoughts. And then he dated one and she was actually just stupid and there was nothing going on up there. So
It's
therefore,
all
don't
it's all
date quiet women.
personalized. It's all
Yeah,
personalized anecdotes and
absolutely.
stuff at that point, rather than actually talking about generalities or talking about why guys talk. See, that's the problem. Is like guys, like for instance, like if he's saying, "Hey, don't date single mothers," that's one of the most common things that we talk about in the manosphere. Is an innate kind of revulsion response for most guys when it comes to single mothers. Single mothers have a very difficult time in the sexual marketplace right now. So it's one thing for me to go and say, yes, well, because men have an innate interest in their own paternity, single mothers have an uphill, statistically speaking, certainly have an uphill battle when it comes to trying to find a guy to parentally invest in themselves and in the offspring of another man. Very difficult. Now, if I go and I explain that in sort of biological, evolutionary, psychological terms, and I break that down, that's one thing. It's another thing if Coach Red Pill says, I dated a single mom one time and it sucked. That's a different argument than if I'm saying, here's why guys are innately kind of have a hesitation to get with a single mother. So, yeah, when you personalize it like that, that's when it becomes comeuppance. That's when it's like, yeah, get her, get her, get her, get her. That kind of like bread and circus,
Hmm.
that kind of video, yes, that's a red meat video. That's why I've always said if I did something that says, hey, avoid single mothers, or here's why men avoid single mothers. I'm not saying, oh, well, I would never date a single mother, blah, blah, blah. I can go and give you the reason why guys have an innate revulsion response. And I mean that in the sense that they're hesitant, they're avoidance response for women who are single mothers. And this is why, historically speaking and biologically speaking, that's the case. Like I said, that's a different argument. That's a different video than a guy going, yeah, I dated several single moms and they all sucked and they all put their children ahead of me. And that sounds like
Yes.
bitching and complaining and moaning. Whereas if I'm going to break it down, it's not just red meat, it's also the meat, right? It's sizzle and steak rather than just selling the sizzle. And that's what most of these guys do. They get into this niche because they see it as very profitable and all they sell is sizzle. They don't sell any steak. There's no substance to those things. And that's what really pisses me off because I've been doing this for 20 some odd years. And that's who is like just bringing that name up. Like, or Coach Greg Adams or Joker from Better Bachelor or whatever, or whatever black pill channel you can throw, Wheat Waffles or whoever the frick it is these days, right? That's who I have to say, no, that's not the manosphere. That's all sizzle. That's no steak. That's no substance.
But it's
They think they know
so
what they're talking about, but they're only regurgitating what sounded good to them because they're part of the same guys who go and say, I'm just going to go look for red meat. I just want somebody to go, yeah, get her, Kevin Samuels. Tell her she's average at best.
mhm.
Right? That is, they get off on that, but they're not really understanding why he's talking about that or he's saying that in the first place. Because that, indignation and that sensationalism, that sells. You know what doesn't sell? When you're trying to intellectually break it down and tell guys, here's why we think what we do, right? That doesn't sell. Comforting lies, comforting,
Yeah.
catharsis sells.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely, for
information
everyone.
is a very hard sell.
Well, I think we actually agree on quite a lot. Not everything. We have different analysis of solutions for sure and different approaches. But I've really enjoyed this conversation. I do have a family and a son who I love very much. And that's what I want guys to understand. Like, I have my criticisms of the manosphere, not because of some, my sisters. What do you guys call it? Sister Uber Alice or whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
Like, I'm not doing it because I'm just like team women. I love being a woman. I love other women. It's great. But I have a son and I want him to have a good, wonderful, healthy life where he as a man is not demonized for his gender, where he doesn't spiral into communities that give him weird parasocial relationships with women where he demonizes them all day and instead is out there talking and with his community. I want him to have a good life and good communities and good advocates for men. Good advocates for men, healthy advocates for men. But yeah, I will let you shout out your channel, what you do, give your kind of concluding statements. I've appreciated this debate. It was way more productive than I thought it would be. Probably would not have been as productive with some other members of your community, but
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Sure. You can find me at therationalmale.com. That's my blog. It's been there for 10 years as of today, as a matter of fact, or yesterday, as a matter of fact. Been doing this for a very long time. I have 4 books, so the Rational Male series of books. You can find them on Amazon. The first one is actually where people always ask me, what order should I read them in? Read the first one, and then whatever tickles your fancy for the other 3. There's no real order to read them. They're kind of like supplemental to the first book. So read the first one, and you'll understand. And you'll also understand where a lot of these guys are kind of like cannibalizing and bastardizing a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today. That book is considered the Bible of the Red Pill, or the Bible of the Manosphere. So that's that. I also obviously have a channel called The Rational Male on YouTube. I do a long form live stream every Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And then sometimes I'll do a show like midweek, like Wednesdays and stuff. And I have a clips channel too, so you don't have to watch a full 3-hour show if you don't want to. I'm also part of a panel show, which is Rule Zero. I'm on there with Rich Cooper, Ryan Stone, John from Modern Life Dating, Troy Francis, and a lot of other guys who are all very sane and very, very much thinkers, as opposed to just sort of sensationalizing stuff. So there's that. I'm working on a 5th book right now, actually. And I think that's probably about it. I mean, as far as closing statements are concerned, I do want to sort of tag something onto what you were just saying a minute ago. It's like, I have a daughter. Okay? I have a 23-year-old daughter. I want her to have a good life too, obviously. I want her to marry a guy who's an alpha male. I want to marry a guy who's got his shit together. I want her to be with the guy and be attracted to a guy who's like me, right? A guy who knows what's going on and is confident and just gets it and all that stuff.
The guy who loves her and sees her as a human.
Exactly. And so it's like, I also expect him to understand his own nature, and I expect him to understand my daughter's nature as well. So there's a lot riding on that. And so I almost want to make sure that I said this is because a lot of people think that I'm against marriage, and I'm not against marriage. I'm just against the way that we do it now. I'm just against the way that it is portrayed. I would very much love if I had some magic formula, if I could give you a 12-step way to have the perfect relationship and the perfect marriage, and so that you would have that's why I don't use myself as an example. Like, here's proof of concept. Here, you can live like Rollo Tomasi, and he's got a great 25-year marriage, and his daughter's really well adjusted and blah blah. If I could package that for you personally, I would do that. But people who are selling you that are selling you something, basically. It's like, I don't sell prescriptions. I sell diagnosis. I sell descriptions, not prescriptions. Because for everybody has a different sort of path, right? They have a different. I'm not you. I don't live in your country. I don't live in your body. My options are not necessarily going to be your options. I'm Gen X. You might be Gen Z. So people who are out there trying to sell you this package deal, follow these steps, do these things, and you'll have this perfect life. I would be very cautious of consuming that. I would also be very cautious of consuming media of guys who are not very good representatives. Always look for the red meat. Always look for the sensational stuff, and then try to parse that out from the guys who are actually giving you some sort of substance that goes along with that. Because those are very few and far between. And that's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation in the first place, is because the manosphere it used to be something that was very, very good. And now it's just kind of being, like I said, factionalized, and it's turning into a grift is what it is. And it's hard to separate who's an honest agent from the guys who are just really there to just sort of read you the daily news and read you they're outrage brokers.
Yeah.
So be careful of who you're consuming when it comes to Manosphere kind of content, and try to separate the wheat from the chaff. And I know that's hard to do, particularly if you're a young guy and you've been hammered flat by girls, your entire life. So bear that in mind. It's not all bad. And again, as I've said before, and people like guys in the Manosphere will run me up the flagpole for saying this, but men and women are better together than we are apart. We are innate, natural, evolved complements to one another. And
I
we're
love
not going to
that.
be able to form families or have healthy relationships with one another if we are adversarial. And so that's really ultimately like what you want solutions. How do you get past that adversarial phase? How do you get past that? And it's tough. I don't have the answer. I wish I had the answers. So.
All right. Well, I really appreciate that chat. I appreciate how civil you were throughout it. It's a hard thing to come
Always.
by. Like you said, the steak, not the sizzle. And everyone, thank you for joining. Ladies, gentlemen, we love you both. Loved having you here. Next week, we are going to be having another gauntlet stream, so you can come at me with whatever you want. We'll chat about everything on my Discord. And I think we've got book smarts coming on sometime. It'll be a surprise stream and a few other things prepared, but we'll see. I'll put it in the schedule on my channel. It was great talking to you all. Rollo, I'll say goodbye to you now and maybe just do a quick wrap up with my chat. But thank you so much again. Cheers.
Sure. You got it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.